Hello everyone, I am Bob and this is the Home Bitcoin Immersion Mining channel. In this build series episode, we're going to continue the setup of an Antminer S19 Bitcoin miner. This is the second in a two-part setup video. You can find the first part of this video in the link above. So with that, let's get started. Okay, so the first step to prep your miner for immersion is to take off the control board cover like we did before. Next, grab a pair of wire clippers and cut any wire ties holding the fan power cables to any other cables. Next, remove the 4 fan cable connectors from the control board. To free the fan cables, the top cover of the PSU has to be removed. There are 2 screws on the back of the miner holding this on. Once these are removed, the top cover comes off by sliding it towards the rear of the miner and then pulling it up and off the miner. Next, pull the fan cables through and away from the top of the miner. Now, in an immersion setup, you don't have to reattach either the PSU or control board covers if you don't want. I'll be leaving mine off to give me more room around the miners for fluid flow in my tank. If you decide to leave the PSU cover off as well, you will have to reattach the top right screw. It is needed to keep the PSU firmly attached to the miner housing. With the fan cables free, the next step is to remove the 2 large fans from each side of the miner. Each fan is attached with 4 long screws. Remove 8 screws from each side and the fans easily detach from the housing. The next optional step is to remove the 3 PSU fans. Now, this isn't completely necessary. You can run the miners in an immersion tank with the PSU fans connected and running. They will spin, attempt to push fluid in the wrong direction, and waste a little power, but the PSU and your miners will work just fine. However, if you are looking to squeeze a little more performance out of your miner, removing the PSU fans is something you can do. Now, removing the PSU fans will require you opening and working within the PSU, and this is extremely dangerous. There are several internal components of the PSU which can hold lethal voltages long after the miner has been powered down and has been unplugged. So, to stay safe, you might want to skip this step and keep the PSU fans as they are. But if you do decide to remove these fans, the first step is to remove the 3 screws attaching the PSU cover to the back of the miner. Next, remove the 3 screws from the front of the PSU. The PSU cover can now be pulled loose and set aside. Again, there are high-powered exposed electronics here. Be very careful not to touch any PSU components. Next, remove the 3 fan power connectors to the PSU board and pull the wires loose and away from the board insulation. A needle nose pliers is the perfect tool to grab and disconnect the fan connectors, keeping your hands and fingers away from those dangerous PSU electrical components. Next, remove 3 of 4 screws for each fan. Starting with the top fan, remove the 4th screw. The fan guard will come off the front with that screw, and the fan can be removed from the PSU. It's a bit of a tight fit, but if you pry back the PSU housing, you can get the fan out. For the other 2 fans, repeat the process. But for these fans, you'll need to slide each fan up to the top position before removing them. Again, be careful here. Keep your hands free of the internal components of the PSU. The next step is to replace the PSU cover. Now, you could leave this off, but I strongly advise putting it back on for your safety. The cover fits back over the PSU. and make sure the cover edges are inserted under the housing on both the top and bottom of the PSU. Reattach the 3 screws holding the cover to the front. Reattach the 3 screws holding the cover to the back. Now with the fans removed, the next step is to prep the miner hash boards. On each board, there are 2 large aluminum spring-loaded heat sinks that are pressed up against the ASIC chips. To help pull heat away from these chips and into the heatsink, there is a small amount of thermal-conductive paste between the heatsink and the chips. This thermal paste will dissolve in most all dielectric fluids used in immersion mining. Over time, this will degrade your very expensive cooling fluid, and so it's really a good idea to remove as much paste as you can. This is an optional step, and you can skip it if you want, but I think it's worth the extra time and effort here. The first step is to remove each of the hash boards following the same steps as before. Remove the 4 screws holding the back plate to the miner, remove the plate and set it aside. Remove the screws connecting the hash boards to the power bus plates, remove the hash board cable connectors, and the 3 hash boards can be removed from the miner. Next, you're going to need a table or workbench to lay out the 3 hash boards and work on them. This is going to get a little messy, so you might want to work in an area away from living areas. Starting with a single board, lay it down with the spring-loaded heatsink facing up. You can identify the side by the exposed spring screws. Using a screwdriver, loosen all of the spring screws on the heatsink. Next, using a small screwdriver, pry the heatsink away from the hash board at all 4 corners. With the heatsink loose, lift it away and remove all spring screw assemblies. Set these aside, making sure not to lose anything. Repeat this step for the other heatsink on the hash board. The next step is to remove the thermal paste from the chips on the board. Now there are cleaning kits out there to make removal of thermal paste really easy. I have a link below for the one I used. It's really cheap and it's just enough to clean 2 miners. Using the cleaning solution, put 1 drop on each chip in a row. Next, take the provided lint-free cloth and wipe the paste away from the chips. Repeat this for every row of chips on the hash board. Now, this is not going to be perfect. You can't remove all the paste this way, but you'll get most of it, which is the goal here. Next up is to remove the paste from the heatsink itself. Now, I tried a few different cleaning methods, and what I found works best here is automotive parts cleaner along with some shop towels. This comes in a spray can and is a very aggressive cleaning agent. It works really well to cut through the paste and removes it very quickly. However, it might leave some residue behind, so after all that paste is gone, it's a good idea to wash the heatsink in soap and water. Now with all of this complete, you can put your heatsink back on, reassemble your miners, and start mining Bitcoin. However, there's one additional and optional step you can take to improve your miner performance, and that is to replace the thermal paste with indium metal film. Now, the thermal paste that came with the miner makes a solid thermal connection between the ASIC chips and the heatsink, keeping the chips cool. Thermal paste has a thermal conductivity of anywhere from 5 to 70 watts per meter Kelvin, depending on the paste. Now, whether you manually remove your thermal paste before dunking your miners, or you let the dielectric fluid dissolve away the paste within your tank, in either case, this high conductivity thermal paste is gone and will be replaced by your dielectric fluid. BitCool, the fluid that I'm using, has a thermal conductivity of only 0.14 watts per meter Kelvin. This is way lower than the thermal paste, but since the entire board, chips, and heat sinks are all immersed in the fluid, and the heat capacity of the fluid is much higher than that of air, heat transfer works in our favor to pull enough heat away from the chips and to keep them cool. But if you really want to push the performance of your miners, you can refill this gap between the heatsink and the chips with indium metal film. Indium has a thermal conductivity of 86 watts per meter Kelvin. It's very soft and it won't dissolve in the dielectric fluid. Now, this really isn't necessary, and as you'll see, it's a ton of work. So you really might want to seriously consider skipping this step. I did it on my miners just to see how it would work and to show you all how it can be done. Now the indium film to use is 0.02 inch thick film. I have a link below for the film I used. It's enough film for about a 2-miner setup. You need to cut the film into small squares slightly smaller than the size of the ASIC chips. This keeps the film from shorting the electrical connections on each side of the chips. I used a paper cutter to make indium strips, and then I used a pair of scissors to cut these into small squares. Next, use a syringe to put a small drop of dielectric fluid on each chip. This isn't necessary, but I found this helps to hold the indium squares in place as I'm working my way down the board. Choose an indium square, use your finger to flatten it, and then use a pair of tweezers to place it on the center of the chip. Repeat this for every chip on the board. Once you have half of the chips done, carefully lower the aluminum heatsink back onto the ASIC chips using the screw holes for alignment. Be very careful not to shift the heatsink once it is resting on the chips. That could slide some of the indium squares off of their centers. Install the spring screws and tighten them down. Repeat this for the other half of the hash board, and then repeat this for the other hash boards in your miner. Now for my 2 miners, cutting all these aluminum squares and carefully placing each square on every ASIC chip on each hash board took over 3 hours. This is a ton of time, and I'm really not sure it's worth the effort, so this is definitely a step you might want to skip. In any case, after your hash boards are put back together, the next step is to insert each of them back into the miner housing. Reattach the power bus screws, reattach the hash board cables, reattach the backplate, and the miner is now almost ready to dip into the immersion tank. The final step is to install fan spoofers. Now the control board expects real fans to be attached and running at all times. If it senses that the fans are missing, it won't let you run your miner. Fan simulators, or fan spoofers, are devices attached to the control board fan connectors. These will trick the control board into thinking the fans are still attached and running. There are a few different vendors out there for these types of devices. I'm using Red Devil fan simulators. I have a link below if you're interested in buying them for your setup. Now, when you are attaching fan spoofers, it's really important to install them the right way. If they are installed upside down, they won't work and they can permanently damage your control board. On the control board, there is a small white triangle painted on the board behind each fan connector. This white triangle points at the ground wire for the fan connector. On the fan spoofer, there should be a matching indication of which side is ground here as well. Matching ground to ground will ensure the spoofers are installed correctly. With all 4 spoofers in place, the miner is now ready to be lowered into your tank. Which brings up a good question: how are you going to lift and lower your miners? These things weigh over 30 pounds, and they're a little awkward to handle leaning over your tank. There are vendors out there who make handles that can be attached to your miners to make this easier, but you are only going to lower your miner into the tank once. So spending a lot of money on specialized handles seems like a waste to me. So I made my own handle out of some wire and some metal tubing I had lying around my garage, and this is how it turned out. So with the miners fully prepped and ready for immersion, the only thing left to do is to set them in the tank, hook them up, and let them run. And here they are. My Bitcoin miners are immersed, mining Bitcoin, and cooled by my Home Bitcoin Immersion Mining system. Okay, so that's all I have for today. My system is finally fully built and my miners are mining Bitcoin. In the next episode, we're going to start focusing on using your miner heat to heat your hot water and to heat your home. So with that, bye.